Welcome, restoration professionals, to Restoration Minutes, your source for industry information and education. Be sure to like and rate us if you enjoy the content we provide.
This episode is brought to you by Helix Co., the most advanced time and material ecosystem for ROMs, time and material billing, job sharing, with digital records and much more. Check us out at www.helixco.io.
All right, welcome back into a new episode of Restoration Minutes, and I'm here with my good friend again, Javier. And today we're going to be talking about trade shows and how to make them successful and how to plan for them and things like that. And then we'll see where it goes because we usually kind of go off on a tangent. Glad to have you, man. What's going on?
Hey, not much, Mike. I wrapped up a couple of shows, both for some independent contractors there in Florida. And then you and I, of course, we did the RIA event that Mark Davis put on for PuroClean. And what a great turnout. We had a great, well, I should say Mark had a great audience. The attendees were from all over the country. Which is what you and I like. We got to really network with some good people, got some good opportunity. I think I set up 3 meetings leaving that little trade show conference. And that's the whole key. When you go to a trade show and a conference, it's great to see the same people over and over and over that you network with, your strategic partners. But the key to going into any trade show, conference, or meeting, is you want to come out with something new. And I think you and I are probably some of the best at that. We go in there and we kind of target, what we do and those same people that are going to bring opportunity either now to us individually, to the companies we're with, or to people that we know, and I think it's there's a lot to be said with sharing opportunity, because I know you and I go in there with our big satellite ears and we're kind of listening. And when we hear somebody needing something or wanting something, we can always step in and say, well, you need to be talking to this person.
Yeah, I mean, what I've found is, a lot of people go into the trade shows, like you said, without really having a plan, and they go in and they're just there to see all their buddies. And even if you're displaying, as a company, you go in and you're just worried about manning your booth and all that kind of stuff. And I will tell you that this year, I've made it a point that when I go to a show that I have a plan, of who I want to see, who's my targets, and B, I try to set up as many meetings and appointments ahead of time as I can, whether it's dinners or breakfasts or lunches or just, hey, can I see you at 3:00 in between these 2 classes? And, we did the Cotality event this year, and I will say I had the most success at that meeting than I have in my entire career by setting up
Wow.
some big time meetings saying, hey, I know your time's important. If I can get 10 minutes, and I'd get in there for 10 minutes and it would lead to an hour, and, they would reschedule something else or decide they didn't need to go to that class, because what we were discussing was captivating and had their attention. And so that is the goal. I mean, is to, and I started in this industry in sales, and obviously went off into the production side of things. And, but we all, like Mark said last week, you should always be selling. It don't matter who you are in a company, you should always be selling. And, that is definitely a fact.
Well, you bring up a good point because, you want to think that your sales team is who's selling, but it's everybody in the company. Everybody in the company is selling at some point or another. I mean, your technicians,
Yep.
they should be handing out business cards and when they complete a job that they're proud of and they delivered a good product, then they should actually push for, hey, just let somebody else know about that. You're always selling at any level of the company, whether it's store level, corporate level, even at the tech level. But there's a lot to be said with what you were saying too about being organized when you go to a show. There's a lot of money that goes into each individual that goes to the show. You got your travel, you're stepping away from your desk, and you're going again chasing opportunities. So that investment, the ROI that comes out of that trade show, it kills me to not only to go talk to somebody at a trade show when you're working the floor, but to talk to somebody that doesn't have a business card and says, "Hey, let me get yours and I'll shoot you an email." To me, if you're at a trade show and you don't have a business card or a way to share your contact information, that's a lost cause. Why are you even here? That kills me
Yeah,
sometimes. But man, uh,
I definitely get
but
that. What I've done is go ahead.
no, I was gonna say,
Think you,
I know you and I, the the second thing, is being able to exchange that contact information. But the most important thing about going to a trade show is not only making the contacts, but it's the follow up. If you don't follow up with the people that you meet at the trade show and exchange information, if there's no follow up, that's a lost cause as well. You got to have the follow up from the people that you meet at the trade shows.
yeah, and two things. A, if you guys have anybody that's listening, if you have one of the newer iPhones, I think it's a 16 and or up, maybe even a little bit newer. Basically, you got the RFID in there. All you gotta do is touch the head of your phone to the head of their phone. You can exchange contacts that way. That's a good thing. Also, Popple, that's what I've been using for years. Digital card,
Yeah.
let them scan your QR code or, whatever the case may be. And that's been very helpful as well because I ain't gonna lie. When you said that about the cards, I'm bad about forgetting my cards or running out. That's the reason I always make sure I always have it in my phone, one way or the other, but the follow up thing, that is essential because, you know, and I do kind of the same thing, even if I'm interviewing somebody for a job, the person that I pick or the people that I pick from or the people that send me a follow up email or a text or something like that, thanking me for my time. And I just try to do the same thing, so if I go meet someone, I at least try to send them something saying, "Hey, man, it was great meeting you. I'd love to follow up sometime with you about what we discussed." Whatever. It just something simple. You can even do it via LinkedIn or Facebook or, whatever your preferred methodology of, touching base with clients is. But, that follow up, a lot of, I, I guess, a lot of keen owners and a lot of decision makers they base those decisions and off of you, and if you are not going to be persistent enough to follow up, then that's going to let them know that you have poor customer service in your company, and so
Yeah.
the follow up, I think is probably the most important thing, like you said, that most people forget or just fail to do.
Before we had the iPhones, I used to go work trade shows and it was all based on, well, how many cards can you get, and you'd go to these 3-day trade shows, and you come back with stacks of cards, and you'd have to go through and kind of write them all down or put them in your laptop or whatever and get all that contact information, start sending emails. But I would file those cards away. And I remember the last time I cleaned out my I'm going to call it a card drawer. I had, I think it was 150,000 cards, from, and it was over a 10-year period, but man, I had 150,000 cards, and contacts that were all from trade shows, but there's a lot to be said. I know a lot of people that work trade shows, and I'll watch them, and you know who the best of the best are. They're the ones that aren't sitting at a booth. They're the ones that are walking the floors and they're listening and they're shaking hands and they're forcing their ways into conversations to meet people. And I remember right after COVID, I made it a point. I said, "Hey, look, I've been a carpet cleaner, full core, all the way up to this point, and it's time to start making a name for myself on the restoration side." And I'd already kind of worked the restoration side, and I was getting work, and I was part of some strategic partner members, and I went out to some trade shows, and I knew exactly who I was going to target and who I was going to talk and who I was going to meet. And you were one of those guys, Mike. But I
I remember
remember I remember being on a mission to meet Matt. over at Royal Plus, and I was at PLRB in San Antonio, and
That's
I
what I
said,
was gonna
"Hey,
say is PLRP. Yeah.
yep." I said, who's the owner of Royal Plus? I see these massive booths at all the trade shows." And somebody finally pointed Matt out and said, "That's him. That's Matt right there." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to go over there and meet this guy." So I went over and I sat there for about 10 minutes, kind of lollygagging around the booth and looking at y'all's little swag and giveaways. And Matt finally looked over at me and I said, "Hey," I said, "I just wanted to get a couple minutes of your time." And he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I've got the largest network of first responders in the entire country." And I said, "I just want to be able to try to work with you guys in some form or fashion." And I threw a couple names at him and he said, "Well, the show's kind of dying down right now." He goes, "Let's go sit down and talk now." And I said, "Oh, we're going to do a meeting right now?" And he goes, "Yeah, let's go behind this curtain." And we went behind the curtain and we sat down for 30 minutes. And that was how I kind of got my foot in the door with Matt. And it's been a great thing ever since.
Yeah, because he had me call you like I think 2 weeks after that to give you the first opportunity for a job up in Jacksonville, Florida. So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
definitely I
hey,
definitely remember that.
you work it and then, that's like I always say, belly to belly relationship, face to face, you know, that's how you get things to happen. That's how you get the phones to ring. Um, you go out and meet people face to face. That's a whole hell of a lot better than cold calling somebody on the phone or sending a couple of emails saying, "Hey, how can we work together?" You you go in there and you said it the other day, Mike, when you said, you got to sell yourself first. And once you sell yourself, then the product and your services, they just kind of roll out. But if you can't sell yourself first, that's you're slamming the door on yourself. You got to sell yourself first, and then throw in there, and then once you can deliver what you say you're going to do, uh, man, that's what opens all the doors. Because I mean, that's the one thing that we see day to day, time after time after time, is over promising and under delivering. And that's the one thing that I learned a long time ago, man. If you're gonna put your money where your mouth is, you better be able to deliver. And then answer your phone and deliver. First thing first is answer your phone.
Especially in our industry. And, nobody spends as much time doing face to face, I think, in the entire country that you do. I mean, good God. I mean, I know your life has been a little wild. You spend about 250 to 300 days out of the year on the road, I believe. If you're not doing that, you take care of the wife's chickens back home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That's not much of a break, I know. And then one time last year, you had to completely rebuild the deck when you got a break.
it's all good.
We have to sell ourselves. I learned that early on. I started out, in life. I worked for a chain, GNC's back in the day, and I got frustrated and thought I could do things better, and so I opened up a couple of stores, and not really thinking that I was like a sales guy, but that's exactly what you're doing. I was going out to these gyms and meeting people and selling stuff and going to church events and community events and sampling products with people, and then I just kind of expanded. I went on from there. I helped run some campaigns and do all kinds of different things around medical clinics and a nonprofit and things like that. But at the end of the day, yeah, I've got this great product that I believe in over here. And that actually, is very important as well. If you don't believe in where you're working at, then you're going to be a crappy sales guy because it's going to come through to everybody. But the biggest thing too is like you said, you've got to build that trust in you and you want to be that go-to person, whether it is for the service that you provide or even something else. I used to back in my days when I was in sales in this industry, I would tell them, call me for everything. I don't care if your
Yep.
roof is
Yep.
damaged, even though back in those days I didn't do roofing. And, I'd call in a roofer, I'd say, hey, well, I know I've worked with this guy and he'll do you right, and pass them here and pass them there, electricians, the whole 9 yards. And, that is what you want to be. You want to be their contact, to know somebody who knows somebody, if nothing else, to get things done.
It's funny that you brought that up because Connor, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the RP Link event when we were all together, I met Connor and his wife, Samantha, and we hit it off just because, they're in my backyard. They live in Fort Worth. Well, Connor and I, we've kind of been networking and so forth. And he had some questions one day about a job. And I said, well, hey, I've got a couple of guys that I was going to do lunch with. Why don't we get everybody together and we'll have a powwow? So we did a lunch, and I think there was about 8 people there. As a matter of fact, Levi was sitting at the table with us. He had come in, and I had a couple of local carpet cleaners with me. And so it ended up being about 8 of us, and we had a great lunch. And then about 2 weeks later, Connor says, hey, man, I got a couple more people that I really wish I would have brought. And I said, well, why don't we get together again? Well, we met again. And the next time we met for lunch, it ended up being 15 people. And so we kind of just jokingly named it Restoration Resources because I've got a social media network that's called the same thing. We said, well, hey, let's do another lunch in February. And we did. And Chris Carter showed up, and we had Clint Ritchie and Michael. And that event brought in 32 people. So now it's been on social media, and we're already planning the March event, and we've already got over 40 people signed up to show up in March. And again, it's all networking, and everybody's loving it. We have people there that do garage door repairs. We got people that do gutters. We got air duct cleaners. We got carpet cleaners. You name it, people that do flooring. And it's just bringing good people together. And in the 4 meetings that we've had, these guys have networked job to job, money to money, and people are getting jobs done that they couldn't have accomplished without making these contacts and doing the strategic partner thing that you and I have relied on for all these years, Mike. I mean, it's a great thing. It's a great thing.
And like, I know me and you joke a bit, if I don't know them, or, maybe Chris or Paul knows them. There's 3 or 4 of us in the industry, that knows a lot of people. And, so as another example is you and Connor were talking, and he was trying to get a hygienist, was that about a month ago, month and a half ago. You guys had called someone else that you knew, and they didn't answer the phone. So you called me, and I called someone else. Well, and that's how it is. I mean, things will come full circle because, Connor hopefully will come get my software one day because I've just helped him out. I'm not expecting anything. I just like to help people, and I like to make friends in this industry. I love this industry, and I want to move it forward every day. But that is exactly what you want to be, because people will, if I need something and I don't know somebody in a certain area, I call you, and vice versa. Or, hey man, do you have so-and-so's number? I met them, but I don't have their contact info. And that's just, that is how you build your network, is by making friends and being reliable.
Well, back in the day, I saw that there was so much opportunity to do with bringing quality people into the same roof, and just kind of looking at the most successful conferences that we go to, PLRB, RIA, RIMS, those conferences that bring those big audiences. I did that ACR conference when I was over there for about 4 years before, I ended up moving on. If you can hand select the type of audience that you want, I was saying, hey, I'm looking for are the decision makers. I want a room of decision makers because I know that that's where I'm going to get my biggest bang for my buck. It's great for these big companies or your independent restoration owners to send a sales guy or a representative to come in or check it out, or even us, when we're making contacts out at some of the bigger trade shows like the RIA, PLRB, we want the decision makers. If you're not talking to the decision makers, you need to move on. Those salespeople and those reps from those companies, they're good to talk to, and they may give you a name and number of who might be your best person to have that conversation with. But that's very important. Is getting in there again, being effective. If you're going in there trying to talk to the insurance people, you got to figure out which trade shows are your insurance trade shows, like the PLRB or some of your other ones like the Alacrity or your program work, your contractor connection. But again, if you're going to go to those trade shows, you got to have your targets, you got to be organized, planned, and you got to figure out the type of business, the type of people that you want to talk to that are going to bring something back to you that's going to be valuable. Those opportunities, it's not just going out there and exchanging business cards and coming back and say, hey, I talked to 500 people, and those contacts being worthless for opportunity.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. One of the big problems, and that it's been hard to understand, from my point of view and probably yours too, is that, you have owners and you have decision makers, and it's, whether it's the owner or the CEO or the GM or whoever like that. But sometimes people will send other staff to these conferences and then wonder why they were not successful. And the fact is that decision makers like to talk to decision makers. It's all there is to it. Why am I, and like you said, I love getting to know people. That's one thing. But if I'm there to have a meeting, if you're not the guy, if I'm the decision maker, but you're not, then how much time am I going to invest in giving you what you need, and vice versa. If you're the decision maker and I'm just a sales guy, how much are you going to share with me and kind of get into that point? Because, you know, you're going to have to talk to my boss, kind of a
Yeah,
thing. And
I
so,
know. Yeah.
well, it, it's great to send your staff and your guys, to these conferences, A, for education, B, for networking and training and things like that, and kind of start getting that experience as you're bringing them up, because I definitely believe in that. You should always be training your replacement in this industry. That's the way I believe. And, but if you don't go yourself, then there's going to be a problem. Or, like I said, a representative that actually has decision making power, and, you know, if you just send your staff, you know, into these conferences and are expecting big results, you're not going to get it if you're not there to make that bridge, that gap. Let your salespeople bring people to you. Let your salespeople help make those appointments for you and make those meetings for you, but you need to be in there, and too many guys that are decision makers, they hate those crowds. They hate going to those conferences, and I get it. You get conference burnout this time of year. You know,
Oh yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to probably fewer here than what I usually go to, but it's still going to be like 7 or 8. And there are some years I've done 15. Counting big ones and little ones. And it's exhausting. I mean, I get it, but we all have a growth mindset. And if you're going to grow, then you got to sell. This is all there is to it. And to sell, you got to get out there. And it's not always just selling to the commercial end client, like me and you talk about. Sometimes it's partnering with other companies and getting their referrals and getting to work with them and things like that. That's where, I've done the best over the last, probably 10 years of my career is, I was building relationships with other contractors. Sometimes it's a roofing contractor. Sometimes it's a bigger or another restoration contractor. Sometimes you want to hitch your horse to the big guy till you learn what you're doing. And then sometimes if you're the big guy, you want those little guys to help out in the markets where you don't have coverage and vice versa, or, like we always work together, and get a hurricane, and I need everybody, and then I'm hope that next time you land all the jobs and you need me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, you know what? That's so right. There's a lot to be said about, this time of year. Right now, we're on the tail end of winter. So if the little bit of winter work that we got, that was a blessing because we didn't have the hurricane that everyone was wanting.
Yep.
But right now, there's two things that everybody needs to be doing, in these months before we get into what I'm going to call tornado season. The spring storms is that's always pretty lucrative for everybody. Everybody gets busy during that April showers, and then May and June, we start getting those thunderstorms and tornadic activity that's all up the 35 corridor. But right now, you got February and probably part of March that you either need to be hitting conferences or you need to be in classes getting education. I know we were talking about Chris Carter. Chris Carter's got a couple good classes. I think he's doing an ICRA class, and then he's got a air duct cleaning class that he's going to be throwing out there. And then, you've got your IICR. And,
Yeah, and he'll be coming to
you
my
know,
event, which now is going to probably be the second week of May. So
second week of May.
we're going to have that ironed out. Yeah, I'm going to have that ironed out by tomorrow. Hopefully.
Hey,
Well,
this year, when I started out my list of conferences, I was like you. I was looking at about half the conferences that I normally do, because I normally do about 15 to 20 conferences, and my list was more like 10 this year. But then when you throw in your
Yep.
strategic partners, all the strategic partners like to have their conferences to prepare for Storm. So by the time I added up
Yep.
those conferences and fed those back into my list of things to do, I'm back up at about 22, 23 conferences is what I'll end up doing this year, So, yeah, it's stay on the road and stay busy.
That's right. That's right. Well, Javier, I appreciate you popping on with me. And as always, I be missing you and seeing you again. I'm glad I got to see you this past week for a little bit, even though you had to skip out after half a day. But, I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. I think PLRB is the next big one that I go to, which is next month, right? March?
Yeah.
Towards the end of March, I think.
I think it's towards the end of March. Yeah, and that'll be in Maryland. Maryland, I believe.
It's going to be at the same place the Coach Halliday event was at. Yeah, so it's at the, I still call them the Opryland hotels, but they're the Gaylords now.
Oh, yeah.
It's at the Gaylord there in Washington.
Well, hey, Mike.
All right, man. Well, I'll talk to you.
Hey, something real quick that we should probably look into doing is at the PLRB conference, we always like to try to get everybody together before the conference starts. So that evening before everything kicks off, let's try to get a group of people together. If anybody watching this, wants to try to see where Mike and I might be kind of congregating and getting our strategic partners all together, maybe for a happy hour the day before PLRB starts, we'll let y'all know where it's at. Just reach out to one of us, and we'll all get together and network the way we do it.
Yep, exactly. All right, thanks, man. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.